Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. How is everybody doing today? Acapulco, my first time here. We have a lot to talk about, so I'm going to jump right into it. The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it actually took place. George Bernard Shaw said that. Now, I want you guys to indulge me a minute in an exercise. Imagine, if you will, somebody entered into this room, somebody came into this room, and they had never heard of anarchism before in their life. I'm sure all of you folks here are very familiar with people and dealing with people who have never heard about anarchism before. What is the first thing that comes to their mind when they enter this room? Exactly. So the first thing that this individual would think of when he comes in here, he'd say, oh my God, all these crazy anarchists in here probably have a tote bag beneath their chair filled to the brim with Molotov cocktails, and they're about to toss these Molotov cocktails around and blow everybody up in the room because they don't care about anything. That's been the traditional view of anarchists. But if any of you all are like me, I want to try to communicate to this individual. I want to try to talk to this individual. I want to connect with this person on a level so that we can come to an understanding about what anarchism is. That's how I want to try to bring them into the fold of anarchism. And what we would do and how we would do that, we would want to convince them that anarchism is not chaos. Anarcho-capitalism is not violence. Voluntarism is not a perpetual bloodbath. Now, the title of my presentation is The Relational Anarchist Revelations. It's not all economics, logic, and morality. So I want to kind of take you guys on a journey of a philosophy that I've been developing that I hope will help coalesce and make sense of all of these ideas that everybody's already been talking about, these ideas of nonviolent communication, ideas about connecting and empathizing with people, and making sense of where anarchism is headed. But before we actually move into the concepts behind relational anarchism, as a person who talks about connection a lot, talks about empathy a lot, I would be remiss not to give you guys a piece of my own background and a piece of my own history because I think it's important. Before I even became an anarchist, I was a sleepwalking zombie who didn't think about anything, didn't really care about life, did not even care about anything besides playing World of Warcraft. I had already been to college one time, and while I was in college, I only went because I was pushed. I felt compelled to go to school because, it's this whole gig about, grow up, you got to go get a job, you got to go to college, you got to do the 9 to 5, and that was the whole indoctrination that I received growing up. And so what happened at one point in time, somebody called me up and they said, and this was a person who's very close to me, they called me up and said, hey, I want you to come over to my place. I got something I want you to try. And I said, what is it that you want me to try? I told this individual. And they said, well, you just got to come over and see. So I came over to their house. I walked in through the door and he opened his hands and there were 2 little red pills in his hand. 2 little red pills in his hand, and these pills were MDMA, also known on the streets as ecstasy. Some of you guys may be familiar with that compound. I know Carlos just got through talking about it in his presentation. And so I took the compound, I took the pills, and this individual said, you're going to absolutely love what happens to you. This is going to be an amazing experience. And I remember coming up on this drug that for my whole life has been told is bad and that it would kill me, it would destroy my life, and it would hurt me. Well, I started coming up on the drug, and I was touching myself. I was looking around everywhere, and my senses were heightened, and I was in fucking love with the world at that time. And then I had this moment of insight. I think the Zen Buddhists refer to it as satori. It's this flash of insight that just hits you in a moment. And then I went into this state of consciousness where I also had this cone or this mantra I kept telling myself. And I kept telling myself, I love who I am, and I'm more intelligent than I've ever thought I was. I'm more intelligent than I ever thought I was. I'm more intelligent than I ever thought I was. And at that moment, I was awake. It's what psychologists refer to as a quantum personality shift. It's when your personality changes literally overnight. Now, most psychologists, of course, they don't agree with that because they think that personality is a stable characteristic, but I don't believe that's the case because I changed in the moment and was no longer the same person as a result of that ecstasy experience. Of course, after that happened, I still wasn't an anarchist, but I thought, man, this compound is super badass. I'm going to take this red pill and I'm going to deprogram people from the matrix with this pill. So I started giving it to my friends. I said, you got to try this. We're going to have a fucking spiritual experience and it's going to be amazing and it's going to change your life. And so I started doing that and people started loving it. And then some people think that I got a little carried away with that drug fiasco that I had there. And what happened after that, I think most of you guys probably know how the story goes. There was an individual who I let come over into my house and in my life, and I let him come and go and please with a key to my house, and he had access to a lot of MDMA, a shit ton of MDMA. And he sold some MDMA and some cocaine to an undercover agent of the state. This undercover agent followed him back to my apartment and immediately got a warrant for the arrest of whoever was in the house and especially him. So the very day after that, I learned state goons kicked in the door to my house, no-knock raid style, came in, threw me to the ground. They were in full battle regalia, machine guns, the whole 9 yards. It was just me and one other individual in the house. We were unarmed. We could not defend ourselves from these thugs. And they confiscated 500 pills of MDMA and 26 grams of cocaine-ish. And at that point, I was taken away and I was charged with possession of a controlled substance, with intent to deliver, and with the intention to manufacture this substance. I was able to get out of this scenario by having a loving and caring family who were able to extricate me from the prison, from the clutches of the tyrants and the thieves and the assholes. And after that, I had to get the best attorney in town, and this attorney had to make a deal with the state to get me out of jail. And it was about $40,000 later that I was able to wrangle a deal for deferred adjudication probation. And I had to go to probation for 10 years. 10 years total on probation. But after 5 years, I guess I had some degree of eloquence because I was able to write a letter to the judge and tell the judge that I had played their little game and it was time for me to come off of probation and come back out into the world and tell my story. So I was able to get off of probation in 5 years. I finished that process. But here's the key. During that process, it was a very traumatic experience to go through. Nights of crying, nights of difficulties, problems with family, everybody making me feel guilty, people telling me how worthless I was and where had I gone? I was a druggie and I wasn't going to do anything with my life. Well, I'm doing something with my life right now by talking to you all here. The biggest problem with this whole process is that it made me a bitter person. For the longest time, I was an angry person, and I started reading Murray Rothbard, and I started watching Stefan Molyneux videos, and Ron Paul's campaign was in full swing during this time. It was around 2009, and at that point in time, I fully started to wake up as an anarchist and realized what had been done to me was absolutely wrong. It was a horrible thing to have happen to anybody, and I was not the one at fault. I was no longer going to feel guilty, and I was going to start placing blame where blame is due, and that is on the state and they're thugs. There was one problem with my method as I went about doing this, though. Since I was so angry, I was having a hard time convincing the people in my life of the efficacy, of the beauty, and the brilliance of anarchism and statelessness. But eventually, I came to realize that maybe I'm being a little too hard on people, that maybe I'm being a little too tough, maybe I'm being a little too hard on myself. So I started developing these ideas revolving around compassionate anarchy. A lot of people tonight have talked about compassionate anarchy. They've talked about empathy. Carlos did. I know Julia mentioned it in her speech. I know that Adam had a whole thing, a whole exercise on compassion. Well, I think what I have here is the philosophy. I have a vision for a trajectory that we can take to uncover this new domain of anarchism, this whole way that we can start altering society and living together with one another. And I just call it relational anarchism. The first aspect of relational anarchism to keep in mind is this notion that, generally speaking, anarchism has been considered an economic it's been considered a moral or a logical philosophy. Some anarcho-capitalists consider it a legal philosophy based on property norms as well. And that's all good and true, and I don't shun any of that stuff. Those are great ideas, and that is also my preference. However, whenever we say that we're anarchists, we're also making a relationship statement. In this sense, anarchism is apolitical. When we say we don't want a ruler in our lives, we're saying I want to be able to relate to you in the best way that we can. I want to have a relationship with you so that you don't hurt me and I don't hurt you. I want to have mutual understanding. I want to have a rapport with you. And this is just what I refer to as the beginnings of the relational approach to anarchism, because I think it's this particular path that is a prerequisite for the NAP, for voluntarism, and for all other aspects of anarchism. It's sort of a microcosmic look, an interpersonal look of how we build this particular culture of anarchism. There's a few concepts that I started to develop as a part of relational anarchism. And these are all very fluid, and this is all still new work that I'm currently in the process of hashing out with several different people, especially people in one of my groups, and you guys could join it if you want. I have a compassionate anarchy group that now has 5,000 some odd very active people, so feel free to join that if you want to. That's my little plug for that. But one of the primary concepts, or a couple of the primary concepts in relational anarchism, is this idea of hard versus soft anarchists. This is not a political scale. This is a continuum. And this continuum, it looks like this. Individuals or anarchists on the harder end of the spectrum are more likely to be more hostile with their persuasive skills. They're likely to engage in more aggressive modes of interaction with people that can actually turn people off. The softer anarchists are more emotionally available, they're more emotionally competent, and they have a way of connecting with other people that naturally lets more individuals come into anarchism proper, as I see it. So I think that we need to dial it down in terms of the way that we communicate with people, with what we would refer to as statists, in order to get more people involved in anarchism. We'll talk more about that in a minute. And I think if we're doing this, we're enacting what I refer to as the relationalist ethic. The relationalist ethic just states that if we're making connections with people, if we're empathizing with people, if we have an enjoyment of being with another person and we're finding common ground, we're automatically living anarchically in that moment. We are living peaceably in that moment. And it is through this underlying process of connection with individuals that we're creating the anarchist societies that we want to live in. Now, this is all happening below the surface without any need to ever use logic, economics, or morality if we don't want to. If we're making connections, finding common ground with people, they're already not using violence against us. So this is something that I would want to strengthen and add to the core of our philosophy and what we do as anarchists. So we have to get away from what I call the logical, economic, and moral axis, strictly speaking. It's still good in a lot of cases, and there's still a lot of people that are compelled to change based on strictly persuasive elements in logic, economics, and morality. But I think if we can just find common ground, make connections with people, we're already trailblazing a new path to anarchism. And this has to do, again, with what everybody has already been talking about here. And I think it's an amazing turn of events in terms of where anarchism is headed into the future. So you're probably wondering, what is the evidence for this relational vision of anarchism? How can we actually practice it? Well, a lot of the ideas that I have developed here, a lot of them came from counseling, psychology, and psychotherapy. I have been working on my master's degree in counseling psychology, and it has been very influential, and it's really helped me develop this process. The key component of counseling psychotherapy and clinical mental health counseling is this concept called the therapeutic alliance. And the therapeutic alliance is a studied concept that just means the best relationship that the client counselor has, or the most empathetic relationship that a client counselor has, will actually determine the levels of positive outcomes in that relationship. There's no amazing rhetorical strategy or no intervention that a cognitive therapist is going to use that's actually going to determine change in the client. It's all based on the relationship. So look at this in terms of relational anarchism. If we act as social therapists for people and come out and actually talk to people, come to terms with them, we're, again, enacting relational anarchism and building the anarchist communities that we want to build. The next two topics I would be remiss not to speak about because everybody else has been kind of discussing these ideas, but these are important components of a relational anarchist and even a voluntarist. But there's this idea of emotional intelligence. Who in here has heard of emotional intelligence? Does anybody know who's responsible for really talking about the concept of emotional intelligence? Okay, the main individual who is responsible for really talking about emotional intelligence, and I would recommend everybody read the book. It's Daniel Goleman, and the book is just called Emotional Intelligence. And emotional intelligence is this idea that we have an understanding of our own internal worlds. We have an understanding of our own needs and our own desires, and we can leverage that, or we can harness those emotions to connect with other people and to work with them for positive change in their life and positive change toward the society that we want to build. The other thing that we'll talk about, and I'm just going to touch on this briefly because I know other folks have discussed this, but nonviolent communication is another very important component of the relational toolkit, of the tools in our belt that we can work with to help people come to terms with anarchism as we see it. Nonviolent communication is just a strategy developed by Marshall Rosenberg roughly around the 60s that is a diplomatic or a negotiation set of tactics in order to resolve disputes that we may have with individuals. Nonviolent communication generally works by acknowledging that other people's emotional inner turmoil, any kind of rage or hostility that they have, is actually an unmet need. And if we can work on understanding that a lot of times when people are angry, upset, or having problems, and we're not able to get through to them when we're talking about anarchism, it's this idea that they have an unmet need. And if we can work on finding out what that need is, we'll have a better chance in getting them involved with anarchism, both on a logical, economic, and moral level, if you want, or this underlying, undercurrent level of relational anarchism that I've been working on. And another important aspect of this, and this is something that I haven't heard many people talk about yet, is this idea of keeping track of our own neurology, understanding the neurology of fear, as I call it. And all that is acknowledging our fight or flight responses and fight or flight mechanisms. Whenever we get into a debate, and a lot of heated debates have been taking place in anarchist circles lately, and that discussion is also coming up. But if we understand what triggers us, what makes us upset, what makes us anxious, we can leverage that to also understand our neurology, or why our neurology causes this. So when we get upset, when we do get angry, we do get angry, or we do get hostile, the brain actually releases a neurohormone called cortisol. Is anybody familiar with the science behind this? Okay. So cortisol is a stress hormone that in very high levels can actually impair learning. So if we get into arguments with statists or anybody who disagrees with us, and we raise their cortisol levels so high, at that point in time, they will not be able to focus on what we're saying anymore, and they will not even want to understand anarchism. They will just push us out of their lives, and this happens online through the processing of blocking people. It happens in real life in the process of just disowning family members and just disassociating with friends or anyone else who disagrees with you because you've likely been too hostile. This happened in my own life with several different people, and it wasn't because, and I didn't place the blame on them. It wasn't because I didn't articulate the ideas correctly. It was because I was too much of an asshole. And this is one of the good things about MDMA. I always recommend about 150 milligrams of it to help get the asshole out of anybody. So that's always going to be highly, highly recommended. And this is the really, really fun part. This is where I hope relational anarchism can actually help us with our current issues. You've all seen the problems right now we've been having with the infighting that's going on. And I don't even know if I want to call it infighting anymore, because we've already seen, as several people have talked about tonight, and I'm happy to talk about it as well, this splintering off of anarchist groups into this more alt-righty, fascist type of segment that looks like it has nothing to do with anarchism anymore. And I think that's something that we have to really question and look at, because if it's not fascist, like a lot of them tend to argue, it's definitely a slippery slope into tyranny based on alarmism and fear. So here's how relational anarchism tries to address that. If we can leverage all the tools that I just expressed and start trying to connect with these individuals, find common ground, and even learn to try to talk to them and to realize that we don't have a fight mentality, that we want to get back together, that we want to connect, that we want to produce the kind of society that we all together want to produce, perhaps we can overcome those differences. Perhaps we can move beyond all of the childish nonsense and bickering that's occurring on a regular basis. You know, and it's really sad. I go into these discussion groups and I can't even get a word in edgewise because I get called a cuck, or I get threatened with being tossed out of a helicopter. And I have said maybe one sentence. I haven't even got to break down the whole philosophy and get them to understand where I'm coming from. It's a tragic state of affairs. So this is the breakdown of communication. And what I've been trying to do with some of these individuals, and they're actually starting to listen to me, is to try to get into their head a little bit and understand what kind of needs aren't being met there. We understand that there's a lot of fear taking place, and perhaps we can be agents of change in the sense of breaking down this fear and helping them come to terms with what we want. And this right here is my modus operandi. This is where we're going to make the absolute change that we want to make, I think. Another issue here, and this is something Carlos briefly mentioned, especially in terms of ADD, ADHD, which I was also diagnosed with. We have this issue, and a lot of you who follow my material have already seen me talk a lot about psychiatry and the problems with psychiatry. Who's familiar with my work on psychiatry as I've talked about it? Okay. We're in a current state of affairs right now where psychiatry is basically the fallout of statism. Anybody familiar with the work of Thomas Szasz and his work on psychiatry? So that's all very important material here. Psychiatry is an institution that has historically been built on subduing people rather than healing people. Psychiatry and psychiatrists go through the process of putting people on these chemical agents that act like fucking chemical straitjackets or chemical lobotomies that numb people's ability to feel, that numb people's ability to connect. So if we're having problems interacting with family members, if we're having problems loving the people in our lives or trying to connect with people, some of that may be, we can blame that on psychiatry and the compounds. Have you ever heard anybody that's close to you say they were on a psychiatric medication and the psychiatric medication has made them into a zombie, or they've suggested that they can't feel anymore? How fucking tragic is that? if you can't even feel if you can't even have an emotional world anymore because of what these compounds do to you, it's absolutely horrible. Thank you. It is fucking tragic. So psychiatry has this whole concept of mental illness, right? I don't buy into this concept of mental illness because it's a way to pathologize people. It's a way to stigmatize people. And individuals say that because I say that mental illness doesn't necessarily exist as a disease construct, that I'm the one stigmatizing people. No. If you're labeling somebody and saying that their brain is broken, you're the one that's stigmatizing people. If you're medicating somebody with a compound that can hurt them, especially individuals who have suffered from bipolar disorder who have to take lithium, which is a salt, and lithium actually at high enough levels overloads what they call the therapeutic window and can actually be toxic. And this is a horrible thing to happen. The beautiful thing about relational anarchism is that if we can start working with people and getting them to come to terms with who they are, come to terms with their past traumas, understand that we love them, that we want to make connections with them, we want to know who they are on a fundamental level, we're already undermining the psychiatric industrial complex. Because the biggest problems that people are dealing with when they go to the psychiatrist and get medicated is what Thomas Sowell called the problems of everyday living. They're problems and issues that have to do with the trauma that these individuals dealt with. It's how they've been coping with life that has been ineffective. So we live in a state of affairs now where people want the answers immediately, and generally that answer is a little pill, which is having the opposite of the intended effect that we want it to have. That's one reason that I think relational anarchism really starts to look at all of these problems and these peripheral problems of statism that also need to be addressed, like psychiatry. The end result of this relational movement, I think, is going to be another movement to start actually creating compassionate communities. It's going to be a movement for looking for new ways to build society in a way that mirrors compassion, empathy, love, human decency, human dignity, and the absence of this nonsensical, barbaric bullshit that the state perpetrates on a daily basis against everybody. And relationalism obviously moves away from that because now we're connecting to people, we're getting in touch with people, and it's a super beautiful thing. And one of the components of this, and a lot of the leftist anarchists are some of the individuals who've talked about these ideas on the get-go, and we really haven't adopted them as much in the voluntarist communities. But there's this idea of prefigurative politics. As a relationalist, I just call it prefigurative apolitics. But prefigurative politics basically states that if we're coming out and we're making connections with people, if we're building communities around the ideas of compassion, around the ideas of voluntarism, then we're prefiguring already the way that society is going to be. Right here, everybody that's in this room with me is prefiguring the way that society is going to be, and we're going to continue to build this up. That's the idea of prefigurative politics, apolitics in this instance. Another issue that always has to be addressed when talking about creating compassionate communities is this notion of keeping in mind attachment theory and what attachment relationships do to people. Everyone already knows that non-peaceful parenting, most of you all are already familiar with this, but non-peaceful parenting actually is part of the breakdown of society and also leads to the creation of statism. Because, and a lot of people have talked about this, but non-peaceful parenting and the violence of childhood is actually projected out into the adult world as statism, as authoritarian, top-down control onto people. So it's my hope that we can also start paying attention to attachment theory and the importance of allowing children to grow up unimpeded, free, without violence, without all the the nonsense in their lives that they have to deal with in this moment. And I'm not a parent yet, but I can testify to you right now that when my wife and I decide to have children, we're going to allow our children to grow up in the most relational environment possible. There will be no hitting, and there will be love abound. There will be nothing but love in that environment. Be interested to see where my time's at, because I'd like to have some time for questions. 10? Okay, that's perfect. So I am open to answering any kind of question right now.
Thank you. Sterling, I just wanted to let you know that your talk is fantastic and was touching, and I'm actually really sorry that I didn't get to meet you until last night, because I feel like you could have had a lot of influence on the documentary that I did on a similar concept. So I would really like to talk to you about doing some content together, because you're awesome. First of all.
Thank you.
Second of all, my question is, I've been moving away from using the term anarchism, mainly because it's been stigmatized so much, and I dislike most of the really loud content that's coming out.
Sure.
I mean, there's some beautiful anarchist content, but it's getting lost in the loudness of all of the alt-right and other movements within the movement. So I've actually started using the term eleuthromaniac, because I like that term. And it's basically like a self-diagnosis. It's the state's way of saying that we're crazy. It's an obsessive need for freedom. So yeah, they're trying to diagnose us. Anyway, my question is, I really love the concept, but is it worth trying to save the word anarchy? That's my question.
Sure, no, that's a great question. I don't actually think I'm trying to save the term anarchy in general. And if I just didn't want to use anarchy, it's a mouthful and there's a lot of symbols, but I sometimes just refer to myself as a relationalist, or this idea as relationalism. So we could just move away from that and just use that term. If you're okay with juggling that many syllables at the same time in your mouth, we'll be good to go. But yeah, I am definitely on board with you as far as a lot of the fear-mongering that's going on, that's possibly causing the term anarchism to devolve even into a worse state than it already is based on what people are saying and doing right now. So that's definitely a problem that needs to be addressed. But the answer is no. I would not like to continue causing problems with the term. But I think I still like the word, so I'm still going to use it. And I think that I've been able to get more people on board with my method and get them to understand that anarchism is not this super bad thing. It's not Mad Max in the Thunderdome with mohawks and tricycles and Molotov cocktails and all the nastiness and nonsense that we've had to deal with on a regular basis. Yes, ma'am. You're welcome. Any more questions?
Yeah, right here. Hi, thank you for your talk. This is awesome. All the speakers this afternoon have been amazing, so thank you all. I'm on board with everything you're saying, and I agree with everything you've said so far, but I'm a little concerned with some of the divisions that we're seeing that we've all been mentioning. I think maybe as a result of trying to bring people in to a philosophical movement with no philosophical underpinning. So they don't know. You know, a lot of these people have never been introduced to logic and reason.
Sure.
So do you have a plan in your philosophy or the things that you're discussing there as far as when it's appropriate to take that relational philosophy into logic, reason, economics, morality, et cetera?
Right. Yeah, really great question. I think the first thing is we can recognize that there is perhaps going to be some people that are never going to be interested in logic, economics, and morality. Can we agree to that? There are going to be people who probably won't ever care to learn or won't ever care to push the boundaries forward, but we all have an innate sense of emotion. We all want to connect with people and have relationships with people. So this is a way I think we can cause the paradigm shift that Larkin Rose always talks about, of getting enough people involved and pulled over to into the movement of anarchism without them ever actually having to think on a deep level like most of us in this room tend to think on. So I think that's one aspect of it. But if you do want to talk about the logic, economics, and morality, I don't have a problem with that. Like I said, my preference is anarcho-capitalism. I love logic, and I'm guilty of talking to people all day long and debating with people all day long on my feeds when I'm in the mood. So yeah, that's a possibility, and we can move into that at some point in time if you feel comfortable with somebody and you've managed to establish common ground and understanding. More questions? This gentleman over here, I saw him.
Do you believe it's that relational anarchy, if followed, would render like non-aggression principle, like that's just something that comes along with it, like it would render it pointless almost, like that people should seek to follow the treating each, basically if we treat each other right and spread love and good energy, that we don't, that the non-aggression principle, it, like, you know, spread love as opposed to focusing on nonviolence, basically, and the nonviolence will come along with it. Is that sum up? Like, do you think the non-aggression principle is rendered like pointless almost by by this?
I don't know that I've actually characterized it like that, but that actually could happen if people are already working on their compassion and their empathy, making connections with people, and everybody is basically having an MDMA experience every day of their lives. It's unlikely that there's going to be a need to even worry about the non-aggression principle. But listen, I don't want to sound like a complete, insane, zany idealist who's talking about a utopia that's never going to exist. So I think that there's still going to be problems of violence, and I still think there's going to be problems of people who are going to have disagreements and they're going to be stuck in the logical domains. So I still think the non-aggression principle has a place in humane and decent discourse.
First of all, I like NBC and everything that you talked about, but there's a couple things I'm kind of confused about.
Sure, okay.
Yeah. So when you talked about psychiatrists and how they drug people and keep them in a psychological prison or mental prison, or
Right.
something like that,
Yeah,
right?
chemical straitjacket was the term.
Chemical straitjacket, right. There we go.
Yeah,
that was
now you're rocking.
Oh, okay. I'm a little confused because later you said you condone people using ecstasy to, self-medicate themselves, right? Which
True.
seems contradictory to me. And
Right.
I believe you mentioned something about ADHD or something, something that psychologists or psychiatrists, you labeled it as a fraud,
Right.
right? And them like using that to medicate people, but I noticed that you also had your own term for, you called it, getting the asshole out.
That's right.
Yeah. So it's, I mean,
Right.
it could be a term.
Yeah,
that,
it's like
right.
dispossessing yourself of your inner asshole is how I
okay, the inner
characterize it.
asshole.
Right.
See?
Yeah.
Okay, so a psychiatrist might have a different word, a term for the inner asshole, but they'd have a term for that, right?
Sure. Yeah, they have a lot more jargon-heavy language.
They've
than
had
I
more
use.
jargon.
Right.
But it seems
Sterling,
you're
1 minute.
prescribing the same thing that a psychiatrist would. Like,
Sure. Okay.
dude,
Yeah.
I don't get that.
Let me answer. I'll answer your question. I was kind of going on there. Here's the issue. There's a chasm of difference between these compounds that are illegal, like psychedelics, entactogens and empathogens, like MDMA, than there are between the psychiatric toxin that they're feeding people. So, here's the thing. MDMA actually helped you explore yourself internally. This is the big difference. A lot of the psychiatric compounds don't cause a mind-altering experience. They don't give you the ability to take a look at yourself from the inside. What they do is they numb consciousness. They sedate you. They put you on the ground to crawl around with the bottom dwellers and the scum of the earth. So that's not what we want to get into. We want to be able to explore ourselves. We want to be able to understand where our compassion and our empathy lies. And we can't discover that on the sedative compounds that psychiatry is prescribing on a daily basis. We want to be able to awaken and come into life. That's what happened to me on the MDMA experience. And I will say this, though, so that you have some closure, but MDMA may not be for everybody, and it may not work the same for everybody, so I wouldn't just arbitrarily advocate it for anybody. Anybody who wants to try these compounds, I recommend that they really read up. There's a great resource called arrowwood.org, so have an understanding of always what you put into your body. Love your body as much as possible.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, Sterling Luxan, thank you, sir.
Yeah,
Thank you.
much
Very
appreciated.
good job. Is that your water?
In a world where Antifa riots in the city streets, cops rage out of control, and the leader of the free world is a fat-ass casino owner, one event stands alone to make anarchy great again.
I actually love humanity. That is why I'm an anarchist.
Backwards in the building like we the ceiling, we illin'. No matter who find it appealing, I'm here and I got a feeling that we'll be dealing a lot of pain with a penicillin get drilled in your head. That we are monsters and yeah, we come from the slums and for months we've been pumped, but for once I am now comfortable. I want to grow, I want some more success, and I want to know that greatness can't be rushed, can't be less, so face the fuss. Feel free to hate on us, we lace them up. Dudes, we done paid them up. Keep snakes away from us and safe from us, you might wanna be. Remember when clowns used to make fun of me and now they wanna be me? See me and they run at me, I'm gonna be the greatest, yeah I wanna be, but I am not the one to be the fakest for the sake of being played. I'm here, like I never left, set to hell. Nah, cause I can't just fail, so just prepare your ears, it'll get for real. Okay, from here, we will never take the sale, it's grind time. My mind and my thoughts, my highs and my faults, my wins and my loss. When will I fall off? It's a chance for me. You are now listening to Veracity. Yeah.
Fuck the media, fuck the banks, fuck drone strikes, fuck tanks, fuck hunger, fuck war, fuck ignoring of the poor, fuck the left, fuck the right, fuck the government. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.